In this episode, I am speaking with Kim Vopni, and Kim is sharing her menopause story and her experience with hormone replacement therapy. I'm Tafika Kier, and this is the Mr. Menopause Show. Hello, Kim. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming on and thank you for agreeing to share your story. And if we could just dig right in and just really start with how your menopause story began.
Yeah, I it started with perimenopause as pretty much as most people's would, unless you go into surgical menopause. But I'd never heard the term perimenopause, so I didn't necessarily know when I had all of these strange symptoms coming along that that's what I was dealing with at the time. So it was in my early 40s, and the first thing was my period started to get very heavy, last longer. I had a lot of big blood clots. I developed anxiety for the first time in my life. I was having trouble sleeping. I was losing hair. I had weird skin rashes. My cholesterol levels were high, even though hadn't changed anything that I was doing and had been doing for years and years. So that's kind of when it started. And it was, years of me sort of thinking that that's just what's happened. I guess it was soon, like a few years after I'd given birth. And so I thought maybe it's just the way that it is now that you're a mom and all this sort of stuff. And people kept saying, well, you're stressed out and have a glass of wine. Everything else on my blood work at that time was normal except the cholesterol. Okay. And so I'm curious. I like to learn. I like to know things. And I'm not opposed to medication, but I didn't want to just get put on medication if I didn't need to be on it. I like to see what natural ways we can do things. And so it was sort of a few years of me dealing with this, not knowing what was happening. And then I started to read some books because I kept thinking in my mind, something's off with my hormones. So I instinctively knew that, I guess. So I started reading some books, and many of them have quizzes, and they would to help you identify, is it estrogen dominant? Is it progesterone that's the problem? Is it, all those things. And I would typically be in the estrogen dominant category. And I would also fall in many of them into a hypothyroidism category. And I was learning more about that. And then down that rabbit hole went autoimmunity and Hashimoto's. And so I ended up there. But along the way, after I started to feel some thinking that there was something off with my symptoms, I went to my family doctor and asked to have my hormones checked. So again, at this time, I didn't even know how you check your hormones. So she did a blood test and everything came back normal, but she said, your ferritin levels are like almost non-existent. She said, I don't know how you're managing. And because of the blood loss that I had every single month, it wasn't surprising, but I myself was surprised because I wasn't that low on energy per se. But I got this and I'm thinking, okay, so my ferritin, yes, I can appreciate why that is, but I really don't believe that my hormones are normal. And so at this point, I had started to learn more and work with naturopaths. So I went to a naturopathic doctor and had a different test that showed me a different story. And that's kind of when the hormone therapy piece started to start, I guess. So that was probably about 7 or 8 years after the start of the symptoms.
Oh, wow. And so did the naturopath actually say it was menopause, or was there any point where that was even said to you at that point?
No. So nobody said anything about menopause. Nobody said anything about perimenopause, at least not to my recollection. But I was starting to learn that term. Mm-hmm. And so again, I don't know if they had mentioned or if it was because I was reading the books that I was thinking that I'm in this phase called perimenopause. But there was this other piece over here that was later on, I was saying, but I think that there might be an autoimmune component here as well, which through all the learning and books that I've read, I know thyroid is a huge part of what perimenopausal women experience. And there's also a big autoimmune component. So, so once I kind of got those answers, so I started on progesterone to start out with, and it helped a little bit, and did some other, I was trying Chinese herbs. I did all sorts of different things, and everything was helping a little bit. But I kept thinking, the more I was learning about this hypothyroidism and autoimmune component, I asked to be tested for autoimmune thyroiditis or Hashimoto's. Mm-hmm. And I showed the antibodies for that. Now, it wasn't off the charts, but indications were, if this isn't addressed, most likely this will turn into full-blown Hashimoto. So I think, when I talk with friends and other women, a lot of people have a similar experience. And I'm always recommending, don't just get your hormones tested, but also get a full thyroid panel as well, because I think that that's a bit of a missing link in this whole transition time that we go through.
Yeah. Actually, in my practice, I actually do something similar, but I just base everything off of symptoms. And I call them the big four. It's thyroid, liver, adrenal, and digestive. Yeah. Every woman that has come to me with menopause have high level symptoms in either one of those four categories. So I totally agree with you on that. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens though is, luckily for you, like you said, you had enough symptoms that it showed up on the test that you weren't actually full-blown Hashimoto's, but you were going there. Most of the women that come to me, they just have the symptoms, but it's not showing up in the test. Right. And so, so then they're like, well, what can it be? I'm like, well, it can be this. It just doesn't show up on the test yet, so let's just focus on the symptoms. So, so I love that you took that initiative and did that. Yeah. Yeah.
There's another symptom that I forgot. I can't believe I forgot. It was constipation, where it was kind of like this anxiety piece where I had never had anxiety. I'd never had constipation. And again, nothing had changed per se. I mean, I'd given birth, like life happens, but I was eating the same diet. I was following the same exercise routine. And then all of a sudden I just started to deal with constipation for the first time. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me what was contributing to it. And again, kind of down that, all the different twists and turns, then it started to become resolved after I had some more answers to that. But there's so many symptoms also in perimenopause that can mimic thyroid challenges, and you're never totally sure which one it is. But so that was my first experience, the first part of my experience.
Gotcha. And so when the naturopath started you on the first part of the therapy, how were your symptoms then?
So it was bioidentical progesterone cream that I started with. And I can't say that I noticed a tremendous difference. Maybe it helped a little bit with the anxiety, might have helped a bit with sleep, but overall it wasn't like all of a sudden the angels were beaming down on me and everything was solved. It was little bits along the way. And so I think it played a role. And now so where I am at now, I think I notice more change from progesterone, but I'm also on a different formulation. But the biggest kind of along this way, the biggest change for me actually, and what helped with most of my symptoms, was taking out alcohol. And so the hormones, again, I'll tell the rest of the story about what I'm on now, but progesterone was the first piece, helped a little bit. I was doing some other changes with diet and that was helping. I had taken out caffeine and that was helping. And it was when COVID came along, and I used to get a bit of a histamine reaction from certain types of wine. So I would have maybe 1 to 2 glasses of wine a week. I wasn't a big drinker, but if I did drink something, it was red wine. And I would sometimes get a histamine response. And so when COVID came along and all of a sudden there was scares of breathing, I thought, okay, I don't want anything that's going to interfere with my breathing. I'm going to stop. I just stopped completely. And my periods totally normalized. My sleep improved. My anxiety went away. And so that was a big, big piece of it. and I'll keep going with the other hormone therapy piece after, but that was a big one in before I had actually reached my menopause. When I was struggling with all of the upheaval, the alcohol piece was huge for me.
Yeah, I literally just did a presentation on that and how alcohol can, exacerbate menopause symptoms.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely in there. Now, when you were dealing with this first bout of symptoms that you were going through, after just having kids and all this, was there any negative impact that your symptoms had on your family life or your relationship?
Um, it was definitely an interruption to my sex life. So I have a very my husband is I work in pelvic health. I'm very open with, like, we're both very open together. So I talk about him about me and my body all the time. So he knew what
Mhm.
was going on. And I felt grateful for some of the knowledge I had because it allowed me to speak openly with him, and him being receptive to it.
Mhm.
He understood why, if I was, not interested, or why I wasn't initiating, or why, he was understanding that it wasn't him and that it wasn't
Mhm.
us. So it interrupted the spontaneous aspect to sex for sure, because I would be bleeding a lot through the
Mhm.
month, and often very heavy. I would have a rock hard stomach. I would feel very bloated. It would be very painful for a lot of times. So certainly put a damper on my libido and my
Mhm.
mood. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it affected our relationship, but that was a bit of a interruption, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
Um, Nothing else really. Like, aside from me, the first couple of days of my period, my cycle, I would literally have to be housebound. I would blow through a pads and tampons within 20 minutes. And so I couldn't participate in fitness or social
Mhm.
outings or do things with my kids. So it definitely put a damper on that.
Mhm.
Travel was challenging during those times. Again, like,
Yeah.
just I couldn't even get through security. And it was like, if I ever had to, I would wear almost like a Depends,
Yeah.
it, just to hold in the blood,
Yeah.
which
Wow.
is crazy. So no real disruption to relationships per se, just sort of general life around those
Gotcha.
relationships.
Yeah. I'm glad that you shared that you were openly discussing it with your husband, because that is one of the areas where other women that I've spoken to, there was not that conversation, and
Yeah.
there was, him not understanding. I even spoke with a man who was going through the process with his wife going through menopause, and he was saying, I thought she didn't love me anymore, and
Exactly.
it's like, and I'm
Yeah.
like, so if they just open the conversation, which is also why I think it's important that men be more of part of the conversation,
A
because they
thousand
need
percent.
to know, because of the relationships and work and everything else. So yeah, so and this just reaffirms that having that open conversation, and I bet that probably helped you to relieve that anxiety of having to worry about all that stuff, because you were able to just be open, and like you said, he was receptive to it. And I think some women are afraid that that their husbands won't be receptive, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you said that, and I love that you are a man in this space, because it brings a voice to help the women, but also to help the husbands or the partners or the male people involved who have, like, we are uninformed.
Mhm.
We as the people who have a uterus and who are going through all these symptoms, we ourselves are uninformed, and that means that our partners, not very many of them, will be more informed than we will, unless they are
Yeah.
potentially working in the healthcare field in some capacity. But open conversation is so important, and one, to help you just get it out and vocalize what it is that you're going through. But it is important for them to understand that it's not them. It's
Mhm.
not a breakdown in this. It's not that I don't love you. It's I need support. I don't know what's happening in my body. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And you may not even know what support you need,
totally. That was me. Yeah,
So, yeah,
exactly.
I always say, one of the reasons I'm so vocal in this space is because I really and truly feel that menopause is more than just a woman's health issue. It's a life issue. It affects you mentally, physically,
Yes.
emotionally. So it's going to disrupt your entire life.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, how could you not? I just remember thinking back when my mom was going through it. And now, just recalling all that, I just remember my mom would shut herself in the bedroom and just suffer in silence by
Yeah.
herself. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And thinking back now, I'm like, it just makes me so sad that,
Yeah.
she dealt with that. And I'm like, and all it takes is just speaking about it,
Yeah.
and it's a natural stage of life for every woman. Every woman, if they get to that stage of life, or if they're not put into medically induced,
Yeah.
will experience it. So it's like it's going to be a part of all of our lives. So we
Yeah.
need to all be part of the conversation. So yeah, I'm glad you
Totally
shared
agree.
that story. So awesome. So how you said that was the first part of your story. So
Yeah.
so how did things change moving forward?
So as I started on the progesterone, um, there was still this kind of overriding fear about hormone replacement therapy, and that, there was still a belief that it's dangerous, and, do you really want to do it? And so I had watched my mom battle with the decision of hormone therapy when she was going through. So she had surgically induced menopause from a hysterectomy. And still to this day, she's almost 70. She is 78. And she was in her 50s when she had her hysterectomy. So she still struggles with hot flashes. And
Wow.
she was on hormone therapy for a while, but battled with that because there was all this other information coming out at the time from the Women's Health Initiative saying it's dangerous, you're going to get breast cancer, you're going to have this. And
Mm.
I remember at one point having a conversation with her saying it's also about your quality of life. So there may be some increased risk with this, but without it, there's also other increased risks. So you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons there. So I remember that conversation, and she was on it for periods of time, I think a total of about 7 to 10 years ish, but hasn't been on for quite some time. And so that was kind of my early picture. And then as I was reading these books, trying to figure out hormones and women's health, the conversation of hormone therapy would come up, and it wouldn't necessarily be that favorable.
Mhm.
So as I had made this decision with my naturopath and trusting the information she had and doing my own research, it's when kind of the world of bioidentical was coming along. And many people will say it's a marketing term. I don't completely agree. I think that there is difference between some of what may have been, what was used in the Women's Health Initiative and what is now used. So then I started down the path of trying to find out more about hormone therapy. And there was a podcast that I heard with a medical doctor who's also an oncologist, whose wife had breast cancer, daughter had breast cancer, and he and his author partner wrote a book all about estrogen and evidence-based information. And that was a real turning point for me in the decision-making process as well. And all of a sudden, I didn't look at estrogen as being scary or dangerous. I looked at it as maybe it's scary and dangerous not to have estrogen. And so I hadn't experienced any hot flashes at this point. I wasn't really struggling with any brain fog. My anxiety had subsided. So again, after the alcohol, things started to normalize. Then when I remember experiencing my first hot flash, and it was kind of like, I think I just had a hot flash. And it's a very distinct feeling. And at first, like, it wasn't crazy. If I felt like what I saw my mom seemed more extreme. So I thought, okay, I can just manage this. And I did manage for a period of time, but it did start to disrupt my sleep. And I really prioritized sleep. And so once it started to disrupt that, I said, all right, I think that there's value in this. And so in the research that I had done, it was supportive of bone health and brain health and heart health and sleep, vaginal health, skin health, all these things. So for me, I felt very comfortable choosing to have estrogen. And I did want bioidentical. So that was my personal choice. And some of the evidence at the time was supporting that. And then around that time, it went over to a different screen on my phone. I thought I lost you. But around that same time, the oral progesterone was being indicated as potentially more effective for certain things. And so I switched from the bioidentical progesterone cream that I had been on for a few years to oral micronized progesterone, and actually, let me back up. Sorry. I changed over to that progesterone, but then I was first started on Bi-Est cream, which is a combination of estradiol and estriol with the predominance of estriol. And it helped a little. But then all the research I was paying attention to was all focused on estradiol. And so I kept thinking that, okay, well, if I'm on estriol, which is more predominant in pregnancy, and I'm not getting as much estradiol, am I maybe missing out on some of the benefits from the bone health perspective? So then I spoke with my naturopath and decided that estradiol would be what I wanted to do. And then that, like, hot flashes completely resolved, back to sleeping really, really well. I feel really good. And then the final piece was one of the changes I had noticed along this way was I didn't have the same motivation for exercise. I also, if I did exercise intensely, I became very depleted and didn't have a lot of recovery capacity. And I had started using some hormone test. Like, I did do one test with my naturopath, and then I learned about the Dutch test, and I wanted to try that. And that my testosterone was like basically nothing. And so I ended up starting also on bioidentical compounded testosterone cream. And that made a big difference in, I can exercise intensely again, and I can recover well. And I used to go to a spin class, and it would take me 3 days to recover. I just had no energy. And, even though I wasn't bleeding anymore, and my ferritin levels were up, so that made a big difference. So I'm kind of on the full gamut. I also take vaginal estrogen as well. So estrogel, systemic cream or gel, micronized progesterone orally, testosterone compounded cream, and vaginal estrogen twice a week.
And that's the combo that you're doing right now?
Yes.
And how are you feeling?
Great. I feel awesome.
And so nothing you would change?
Nothing I would change. No, I can't think of anything that I would change. I feel calm, steady Eddie. I feel like I have great energy. I sleep well. I have the capacity to work. I didn't really struggle with brain fog. That wasn't something that I really felt was a problem for me ever. But I wouldn't change a thing currently. I feel great.
Great. So I'm glad that you shared about the testosterone too, because you're actually the second person that I've interviewed that said that their testosterone levels went down, because there was something that came out a few months ago that stated that for women going through menopause, that although the estrogen goes down, that testosterone levels can stay high for up to 15 to 20 years. So, and here we see two women who have had the complete opposite thing happen. So
Right.
again, it just goes back to saying everybody is different. You're going to respond differently to things. And as we've seen through other interviews I've done, everyone's combination of HRT has been completely different as well.
Totally.
And everyone's doing well on their particular thing. One of the things, I don't know if you saw the menopause talk that Oprah and them did. And one of the things that was driving me crazy was when Oprah kept saying, once you get that first click, your life is going to change. And I'm like, no, for some women, it's going to take a whole lot of things before that thing changes. And we know everyone listens to Oprah, so all these women are probably running out to get
expecting
the click.
it.
So I'm like, so we need to let women know that may not be the case. So again, why we're having these conversations and just people telling their stories. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's definitely been an evolution. And I think that I always felt like I led a healthy lifestyle up until I started going through this. But there was always I was noticing and learning more of little tweaks that I could make. So it was really a combination of the hormone therapy played a role, the lifestyle changes played a role, stress management played a role, like all of those things, removing alcohol, removing caffeine. And at the time it felt Like I had to give up so many things. I loved my green tea. I still miss my green tea, but I feel so much better without it. So once you get over that initial hurdle of feeling like, well, why do I have to stop this and
Yeah.
missing it? Then when you realize how much better you feel, it becomes very easy to not have it. And the same thing happened with alcohol. I miss the social aspect of it. I miss having a glass of wine with my husband. And on occasion I do still. So once in a blue moon, I will. But it just made such a tremendous difference. And everything improved so drastically that it's a no-brainer. It's not a hard thing to let go of. But the point I'm trying to make, I think, is that while hormone therapy has played a tremendous role, it's also been all of the other things that I've done and changed along the way. And it has been an evolution. And now I feel like I'm on the other side of post-menopause now, where sometimes people start to struggle more post-menopause. Sometimes things resolve for some people, but I feel like all of the things that I was going through in the tumultuous perimenopause and the fact that I acted on it made the transition to post-menopause. And now I'm almost 2 years post-menopause now, that it's been an easier journey, and I'm grateful for that. So even though it was tumultuous, I'm grateful for the learning and the opportunity to experience those, because it's made me better on this side.
Yeah, yeah. And again, another thing that I'm glad you shared, because it is important. It is a combination. And again, a lot of women think, I'll get on estrogen, I'll be fine. I'm like, you got to make a lifestyle change, because, it's not a calorie issue, it's a hormone issue, right? So it's about the quality of the calorie, not the amount of the calorie. So choosing the things that are going to keep you healthy, because like you said, some women get osteoporosis after, some women get heart disease after. So you do have to make sure that, and all of those things are things that can be helped with better nutrition. So, and exercising correctly. So it's very important to share that. Now, great. So thank you so much. And before we cut out here, is there any last words or words of encouragement that you can give some women that are going through menopause right now and maybe struggling like you were at the beginning to make the decision to do something, or just don't know what to do?
I think trusting your instincts and being curious about your health. And if a door is shut, so if a doctor is not willing to help, there are other doors that will open, and there's practitioners online. There are books to read. Estrogen Matters was a big one that I really enjoyed. So continue to be curious and know that you aren't crazy, and trust what your body is telling you, and find somebody who will listen. So don't give up. And also I do what we just said. I do recommend that it is a lifestyle plus hormones that can, I think, make a bigger change than just the hormones or just the lifestyle on its own.
Yes, absolutely. And it is so interesting. Every single woman at the end says the same thing in a slightly different way. And that is if you're not getting the answers from the person you're talking to, go somewhere else and find someone that can give you the answers. And I could not agree more. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that the viewers are going to love, hearing another perspective and seeing that there are options out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate having me.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.